For the past 10 years, in the same place, every year maximum temperature is 50 degrees centigrade. That's a shift of 6 degrees in my lifetime. So you can see this almost any place. You analyze the data are there. You cannot ignore the data. So we have to make sure that we take action today. And then the penalty for waiting for a decade or two is great. We just can't wait anymore. We have to act today. And then policies, another important aspect is you have to have effective intervention policies. In many developing countries, oftentimes the poor do not have access to support mechanisms. For example, today we have systems like weather index-based insurance. There are banks that are now getting active in some developing countries where farmers can buy the premiums for these insurance for a very small amount of money. There is a threshold rainfall. For example, in a place where expected rainfall is 500 millimeters, for every millimeter that is below 500, the insurance premium pays you out cash for the reduced amount of rainfall. Now that's a very interesting, improved source of dealing with the risk. So those sort of intervention policies must be put in place. Similarly, when it comes to drought, you have to have planning, you have to have preparedness, and you have to have impact assistance policies, so that we have to make sure that those are effective when you have climate change. Now let me come to the third issue, human resource capital. This is another issue that is often ignored. Whenever you talk of action, you must make sure that the local communities are actively involved in the planning, right from the day one. It's not that a committee sits in some building in some government ministry, works for about a month or two, and then comes up with a plan and say, okay, now communities need to adopt. Communities have to be involved right from the beginning stage when the committee is meeting in the meeting room. I think so it's very important to have their participation right from the beginning. So if you have an innovative technology, extent to which the communities would use the technology depends on their participation in the development activity. And often communities also have perceptions. It doesn't matter what medicine the doctor is prescribing, if the perception of the patient is that, oh, this medicine may harm me in some way, he may take the medicine, but he may take it home, but he may not take it, actually. So those perceptions must be understood and must be addressed when we talk about sustainable management of natural resources. And third is that these sort of natural resource management practices have to be sensitive to both social and cultural perceptions, and also the traditional resource management practices. Now, oftentimes we ignore cultural perceptions. We think that the entire globe is one culture. Oftentimes cultures do differ and their perceptions differ. And those must be understood when we talk about dealing with these issues. And the last issue is practices. If you want communities to deal with these impacts, you must develop and communicate effective practices. And in this, the most important issue is risk management and also adaptation practices. But these practices vary from the region to region, and also they vary from the local community to community. So those must be understood, and then those practices should be developed. Oftentimes there are also practices that you can implement today, even if there is climate change or no climate change, because these are what are called low regret practices or no regret practices. For example, you have an improved land management practice that can help you. Even if there is no climate change, you are improving your land continuously. So those are no regret practices that can be adopted today and can be applied. Technological innovations and improved practices are extremely important, but they must be communicated and should be constantly updated so that the communities can benefit. So in conclusion then, today climate variability and extremes are real, and these are going to increase in the future. So we must make sure that these do not impact enormously the socio-economic development, and by using the four aspects that I talked about. They also require multi-agency efforts. When we talk of climate, we think of meteorological services alone, but that's not enough. All agencies have to come together at the national level so that you can emphasize the science, the policy, the practices, and also the human resource capital. And finally, urgent action is needed today if we want to reduce the impacts and if we want to make sure that communities are safe and and their well-being is guarded. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I would like to introduce the last speaker in this section, Dr. Masters, who is the Director of the Development Regional Activities at the WMO, and in this capacity is responsible for all capacity building activities, technical cooperation, education training, but also regional programs. And he will speak about capacity development to combat the impact of climate events in the Arab region. Well,
everyone talks about the weather, but no one ever does anything about it. Have you ever heard that? I think we have been taught from our infancy that this is the case. There's the nursery rhyme that they teach in the UK. It goes something like this: whatever the weather, we must weather the weather, whether we like it or not. I think that perhaps in this region, you might add the words inshallah. Is this true, though? Can we do nothing? Is it just something that happens? Well, I was very much touched by the words of a minister from the Gulf region yesterday, who said that God made us to work, but He also gave us minds. And He asked us to use minds in science to instruct our work, to consider how we might be able to plan for the future, to provide for our families, for our communities. So that's what we're about, to provide the tools and the capacity necessary to make decisions that will be made by individuals at the family level, but also by heads of state, as to how to spend the budget. We've heard now from speakers indicating changes are taking place. We see from the Arab region that there will be significant increases in warming, decreases in availability of water. And decisions have to be made, planned for. You heard now there are a number of coping mechanisms, investments in science, focusing on policy, bringing it down to the practice at the national and also the local levels. I'm here to give you just a few ideas of areas perhaps we should focus on in building capacity in the few short minutes that I have, that I hope will complement what my colleagues have already said. I'll give you 4 areas. First of all, I believe we need to focus on the capacity of weather services. Second, I believe we need to strengthen and build multi-sectoral institutional partnerships to provide service and delivery to all sectors of our economy. Thirdly, we need to conduct pilot services, projects, training, and outreach that will serve as examples to the broader community. And finally, we need to build a regional support capability. This is the functions in many respects of the WMO in working with our partners worldwide. So first, expand the capacity of weather services. Why weather services? Because that's where it starts. We need a weather service to collect information about what is happening in the environment. There needs to be an observational infrastructure. There needs to be individuals who are well trained in understanding this, and how to manage the data, provide predictions, communicate this to the decision makers, exchange data globally so that models can be worked and used. The problem is that many weather services in this region, as well as the world, lack the kind of institutional frameworks that are necessary, the infrastructure, human resources, and procedural resources to make sure that responses and decisions are made properly. The third bullet there says interdependence in regional and global contexts. And here the point is made that we work in the World Meteorological Organization globally, because weather does not respect national boundaries. What happens in one country today will be in another country tomorrow. And to be able to provide forecasts that go out days, weeks, months, and years, we need to work together. The weakest link affects the entire community. Faced with the traditional set of hazards that come primarily from the hydrometeorological community. The call for information, the call for tools, the call for specific sectoral-driven information is increasing. The problem is, however, if you look at the meteorological services globally, they are challenged in being able to meet these new demands, let alone the traditional demands placed on Met Services. You can see here that well over half of all of the Met Services look for improvements, and many of them mean significant improvements in being able to provide the kind of planning tools necessary to be able to provide infrastructure, forecasting, to communicate this information globally, to analyze and understand how this can be done. There's also an extreme need right now to improve partnerships so that when you provide a forecast, it's understood and used. We have been discovering that more and more times a forecast can be perfectly accurate. The information can be provided in a timely way, but when it's received, people don't know what to do. The infrastructures are not in place in the countries to use this information. The communities don't know what it means when they're told that a flood is coming, or when a hurricane's about to hit. So we need to move beyond our traditional boxes and move out to the rest of the community. We see this is also true in climate. The majority of climate weather services for providing climate information are in category 1 or 2. And so the question is, how can you begin to provide these specialized climate products? How can you begin to provide accurate decadal climate predictions? There needs to be investment in the Met Services around the world to see this kind of thing happen. We estimate that in the human resource capacity alone, we're looking at the need to train approximately 3,000 climatologists in the next 10 years to be able to meet this demand. And that is a significant challenge. In developing the capacity of the Met Services, we realize that it's not just throwing equipment. We're giving a little bit of training here or there. But in fact, it's an entire process. Again and again, we have found that making some investments in countries, after a few years, those investments are gone. We train someone. 3 years later, they've left the service. We put in equipment. 2 years later, it's no longer working. There has to be a concerted effort to make capacity building sustainable. The key to this is following quality management in the capacity development process as we work with national governments and others. This means defining the requirements as we understand them, observe and collect information properly, understanding what the capabilities of the countries are to respond to this, addressing these issues by looking at the gaps and what the requirements are for the national government, for the global community, and then trying to develop a strategic plan to address these gaps. Then there's two very key steps that I believe is lacked in many capacity development efforts, and that is the commitment, the engagement, the ownership of the national government. If you can build into your national planning process the need for climate forecasts, climate resources, and decision-making tools, then the chances of this surviving, change of administration, reduction in government funding is much greater. Because it suddenly becomes part of the wolf and whistle of the integrated planning process of the government to have this information before you build, before you invest in agriculture, before you plan a new health program. You begin to consider what are the climate aspects that we need to work on to make sure that we're prepared for it. And then, of course, there has to be the response, the follow-through, and the monitoring. We're also seeing that as there's increasing aspects of climate service and information, there's increasing requirements for this information. We're seeing that there has to be new avenues that the Met Services need to move into. Decision makers need to become aware of exactly what the issues are and what it means. There needs to be a stronger dialogue, partnership with all the sectors. We're very happy that recently we held the first forum with the private sector community as part of World Meteorological Day, focusing on the kinds of things the private sector can do to help the global industry facing climate impacts. We also have to have consistent ways of evaluating. We need to work forward in national development strategies and regional perspectives. Second thing, strengthen or build multi-sectoral institutional partnerships in service delivery. This is the chart the Secretary General put up before, talking about the global framework for climate services. And I'm going to, of course, focus on capacity building overall, but focus on the upper box within that cloud, user interface platform. Of course, we need to build basic capabilities below, as I mentioned to you, but the area, in fact, that we believe that we need the strongest emphasis right now is building the relationships we have with the user community. This means going beyond traditional scientific understanding of things, and beginning to look at sociology, beginning to look at various sectors of our economy and how they can use the information together with the information that they have to address the challenges that we face as we see changes in our climate. This is the private sector, this is research, this is agricultural users, water, health, construction, disaster reduction, environment, tourism, transportation. Almost every area of our economies are affected by climate, weather, and water. Well, the WMO is not a large organization in many respects. We only have about 300 people in our secretariat. But if you count the fact that we have members in the entire world, 189 members, each of them working through their Met services to deliver these kinds of services, then we believe that we can do a lot. The WMO can carry out pilot projects, we can conduct training, and we can participate in outreach to make people understand these issues. So we are doing those. I highlight just three, for example. Severe weather forecast, where global models are being applied locally, working with farmers in one particular community and explaining to them how climate can affect their work. Then there's, of course, joint action that can be taken at a regional level. Here, I highlight the joint action between the United Nations and the League of Arab States for assessment of the impact of climate change in the Arab region. So the roving seminars that we've been working on in West Africa is an example of how we can increase self-reliance of rural farmers by raising their awareness of effective weather, climate risk management, and sustainable use of weather, climate information services for agricultural production. In this program, 5,700 farmers participated. A number of rain gauges were put out so that we can improve our observational capability. And we were able to use this then to move into other areas of the world that can use the same kind of information. The farmers were actually presented with information that affect their daily lives, and they were then given the opportunity to speak, to ask questions, to try to understand how they might adjust the way that they do their farming faced with changes in climate. Another area that we are working on is trying to work with the global producing centers, those who have global models, bringing those into the regional focus, and then applying those and downscaling those so they can be used locally. This is true both in our severe weather forecast demonstration project, but it's also the same approach that we're taking as we're developing regional climate centers. And that brings me to my last point, building regional support capabilities to help countries. I mentioned already the regional climate centers, or RCCs. The Regional Climate Outlook Fora, you can see circled a number of regular fora in which people come to discuss the forecast, the seasonal, interannual predictions, as they may apply to particular regions and particular sectors. We're hoping that the regional climate centers can be established in each of the regions of the world, working in many cases in a nodal approach, a virtual climate center approach, where many countries come together and try to address what the climate is doing and how it can be applied and addressed in an adaptive approach in each of these regions. We're also trying to build human resources, train people in our regional regional training centers, and adding to our regional training centers an increased number of climate aspects. We have to focus, of course, on special needs of least developed countries as well as small and developing states, and landlocked countries as well. Those countries that perhaps don't have the same kinds of resources that others do. So one of the things we're trying to do is work with those who are better equipped, have more information, and work with those who do not. This is true also in this region. I'm very happy to see a very strong response to ministers responsible for meteorological services in this region as they're looking at how they might be able to help those others within the area focus on these important issues. The WO can help in this process. There's a whole array of ways in which we can help, both from assessing members' capabilities all the way up to providing kinds of volunteer support, encouraging bilateral cooperation. We, of course, are a standard-setting body, so we understand the kinds of measurements that are being made, making sure that what's exchanged and what's done is calibrated, understood, and studied. There are a number of other things that I've mentioned, and I'll leave up here on the screen for a moment. WO, however, does not work in a vacuum. We must work with other communities, other UN agencies, as well as national and regional organizations. To carry this message beyond the meteorological community requires that we work with those who are directly involved in bringing this information to the users at every level. So I want to leave you by saying thank you, but also to say I believe we can do things about the weather. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we heard from Dr. Saad. First of all, we heard about what is the local issues, the issues in this region. We heard from Dr. Shiva Kumar what are the issues which have to be tackled, what do we need to do, and from Dr. Masters, how we can do it. My own presentation was more to provide the sort of framework, ideas of framework, how the pieces of the jigsaw can fit with each other. So, since now we are a bit late in the agenda, I would propose that we still have an interactive session where maybe for about 10 minutes we could take a number of questions. So maybe I will move back to my seat, but I can see already one question here. Yeah.
Sultan Fadel, Director of Sustainable Development Sector at College of Business Administration. Thank you, gentlemen, for this amount of information. Shocking yet devastating information, especially from the side. Climate change is a fact now, it's a reality. But we hear different scenarios for the main causes of climate change. In this line, discuss and elaborate more in the coming sessions today or tomorrow. Direct question, what is the main cause of climate change? Is it global warming, CO2? Thank you.
Okay, maybe I can start, I don't know whether you